Yeah, it's one of those qualities, those three decision making, timing, accuracy, and scouting quarterbacks is not an exact science. It's you can see over the years that there's been really quality players that you think had it that maybe didn't show up when it actually came time, and then there's ones that you weren't sure if they did and they show up and they play well. So yeah, those are things that we have to do our due diligence on and make sure that we're trying to unturn all the stones from the tape, from the person, from the workouts. All that stuff is a part of the process to try to make the best decision we can when it comes to evaluating quarterbacks in general. Yeah. Yeah, I think that there's a requisite arm strength, right? You have to be able to make a certain amount of throws down the field, outside the numbers, tight windows, those things. But then the other part of it is the ability to anticipate and to make the decision that puts the ball in the right window. Those things all matter. So again, you don't have to have the strongest arm in the entire draft, but there's a threshold. A minimum requisite, I think, is the best way to put it. But the rest of that stuff matters, I think, just as much. Your ability to anticipate, to throw on time, and to throw accurately, and you mix that with the arm strength portion. So there's a lot of different ways it looks. There's a lot of different ways quarterbacks can play. So I hesitate to fit one bucket is more important than the other, but the whole picture has to fit.
Right. As you go through that process, like evaluating the quarterback, you look at a rookie, you look at a veteran. Like, how do you weigh out your immediate security versus the long-term security?
I think we're trying to get the best player, period, and whatever that looks like for us doesn't make any difference to me. I want as many good players as we can find, and it's my job to coach them. It's our job as a staff to put them in position to have success, and that part is what matters the most to me. Is that I don't worry about anything other than that, and as many good players as we can get, it's our job to fit them in to our schemes, offense, defense, and special teams. So that's how I look at it. I'll never change how I look at it in that regard, that you have to be able to fit good players into what you do, and you build your systems around that talent at the end of the day, and that's our job. Yeah. There's sort of a two-pronged approach, right? There's the evaluation of the tape and what they've shown over their careers, and then there's learning about them as a person. How do they see football? How do they interact with their teammates? How do they interact in your building when you bring them in? So all those touch points now are starting. So we've got the evaluation of the tape, and now you're trying to figure out how that tape matches up with the person and their knowledge of football, their knowledge of schematics, and where those things are good or where they might need to improve. And that's what this next, from now until the draft essentially is about, with the combine being the starting point, and you have your 30 visits in your spot. They have pro days, there's private workouts. All of those things factor into the process as you get closer to the draft. But right now is trying to find out as much as we can about the person as opposed to just them throwing in a workout. I think you're always looking for the player that's going to be better longer. So you always are looking for the long term. I think there's short term components that you're looking for, but you want players that are going to be, playing at their best for their longest, and hopefully for 10, 12, 15 years if you hit it right. And that's all positions. There's you want guys that are going to grow and continue to get better.
Brian, one of the things about the quarterback position being in the first, trying to get a guy, like you said, to be long term. Are you looking for a guy who can compete to be a day one starter?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Anytime you're picking, especially in the first 2 rounds, 3 rounds, you're looking for guys that can impact and play. But again, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's not other paths to that process. There's a lot of different ways it's been done over the years with guys that have spent time sitting. Some guys have played right away. Those are all things that we'll evaluate as we keep going. But certainly picking a guy at the top of the draft that is going to be an impact player. That part's the hardest part, to be honest. That's a good question, because there's a lot of guys that can talk it in the meeting room. They know what to say, how to say it. They can articulate their schematics. But the hardest part is can they take what's being taught and then execute it And sometimes it's really more about taking it from the practice, from the meeting room to the game day. That's the part that really matters the most, because guys can sometimes do the meeting room to the practice field, but it's about how do you execute under pressure and under duress when it's all live. And that's the hardest part to find out. Sometimes you don't necessarily know until you know. Oh yeah, there's ways you can try to simulate it as best you can to try to figure out where those gaps might be or where you might be looking for supplementation to get them to that point. But yeah, there's definitely ways that we try to simulate that as best we can. It's not a perfect science though.
Brian, what's the biggest way that the NIL era and all the accompanying transfers that come with it have changed the way that you evaluate and really try to create information out of the process?
Yeah, I think I would say probably for the area scouts, it's probably the hardest because years past, right, before all these guys transferred, you'd have 2, 3, 4 years of information gathering on a player. If you're an area scout, let's say you're the SEC, you're the Southwest area scout, and you're building 4 years worth of a profile on a player. Well, now these guys might transfer 2 times, usually at least once, sometimes twice. And now there's gaps in the information. The assistant coaches don't know them as well. You don't have the same depth of character evaluation that maybe you had before. So it's a changing landscape, and our guys have, just like everyone across the league, is adapting to. But I think there is an effect on how well you can know a player when they've jumped 2 or 3 times. You got to do your research, and you got to do your due diligence, and you got to make sure you talk to all the people at those places to sort of put the picture together. Whereas 10 years ago, you could have a pretty good profile built on a player over the course of 3-4 years.
Is that something that allows more collaboration with those area scouts in terms of being collaborating on?
Oh yeah, the area scouts are critical. That their ability to do that and find information. They're in the information gathering business, and their ability to do that now in a changing landscape, I think, is really, really critical. And those guys play a huge role in helping put together the profile of a player when it comes to their makeup. And it's certainly, landscape has changed, and they've done a good job adapting to it.
Has their role increased?
One more time, John. Oh, very realistic. Yeah. Yeah, it's very realistic. I think he's a unique player that there's not a whole lot of other players you could compare what he's done. There's not many guys that have played that many snaps on both sides of the ball. And you watch his tape and you see his ability to play both at a very high level. So, yeah, I think anybody that you talk to about him is going to say the same thing, that he's got the ability to play both. And that I think you're going to find out where he fits if you were to get him. But he's got a really unique ability to do a lot of different things. Well, you got to start somewhere. I mean, you got to put your teeth in a position first, and then you see where you can add them in. So those are all conversations that we have as we work through the process on where a player like him. What do you do with a player like him, and where do you first start him, and where does he help you on all sides of the ball? So he can return punts. He can, he's got a really unique skill set that I don't think there's many players you can compare him to.
So where do you first start?
I would say you probably start him. He probably starts at corner, and then you find ways to interject him into the offense as he gets more comfortable. He plays more and more offensively. But I think his corner is probably his starting point. In my opinion, you might get varying opinions on that, but then I think he's got a real role as a receiver.
But offensive line is also really depth heavy class this year.
Yeah.
How are you guys weighing that as you evaluate this?
Yeah, we got to get better up front. There's no doubt. We had too many sacks given up, too much pressure. We have to be able to settle that part down. We got to improve the front. I would say you got to improve the fronts on both sides. We're looking to add talent on both sides of the fronts, and I think you can see, the teams that were in it at the end there, that was a major part in their successes was their ability to play, stout, strong defense and pass rush, and then you got to be able to protect it. So we're always looking for trench players, I guess is the best way to put it. But yeah, there's always that outlier. If you could find a great guy, a guy that can score touchdowns at a high rate, that part factors in.
Brian, on that note, when you talk about the difference between fit and then talent level, how do you kind of measure where maybe a guy is a more physically gifted player but hasn't done things in college that fit what you might ask of him?
Yeah.
Versus a player who has done things that you've asked about but may not be the physical
Sure. I think the best way to put that is our job as coaches is to put players in the best position to have success. And I would never sacrifice talent for system. It's always going to be player driven and player first. So if you can find a great player, we fit them. And however that looks, there's plenty of plays in football in all three phases that you can find ways for guys to have success. So I would always say the player is going to come first, and it's our job as coaches to fit what we do around that player, whether that's an offensive lineman, a receiver, a quarterback, a pass rusher, whatever that looks like. Our job is to fit the system to the talent, and I would never sacrifice scheme over talent at the end of the day as a general philosophy. Oh, they're both worthy of the conversations that they're in right now. You know, they're both good players. I think they've earned the right to be in the conversations they're in. As far as where I see them and how I stack them, that's for me. But I do think they're worthy of those conversations. There's some other good players in this class too, and I do think that one of the things that's most important is that you never make an assumption when you're in this process, and that you treat every prospect, whether you think they're the first pick or the 200 and something pick, that you go through that evaluation phase with the same intensity and thoroughness that you would regardless of where you think they fall. And so you have an accurate evaluation of all the players, where the class stands, and how you'd stack the class. That's also really important because there's evidence over the years that there's a lot of players that in those later rounds that end up being impactful players. And so you just make sure that you do your due diligence on all the positions from the top of the class to the back of it, so you have a great feel for where those guys might fall.
Last one.
Coming out and evidence of college that has developed this team. Is it harder to find offensive linemen or defensive
I think there's a challenge to it because what they do in college is so different than what they're asked to do in the NFL. Usually you find some version of what they do that's good, whether they're a good run blocker or natural pass protector. And then there's going to be some development that has to take place. There's going to be a part of their game that they're going to have to get better at. And they're playing a different caliber of player, too, which, some of these tackles, they don't realize how good every week there's a $100 million pass rusher on the other side. There's development that goes into it, and you have to be able to do that. And that's the key for the offensive lineman is how quickly they can take to that coaching and perform.
How's everybody doing? Any questions? Yeah, it seems to be. Yeah.
How much action are you? I know it's early, but is that number one pick a big topic of conversation with the cohorts?
Well, it has been. Yeah. I mean, it has been in the media for sure. Anytime you have number one pick, it's always going to be a topic of conversation. Yeah.
Has it gotten to a point where a lot of other teams are getting very nosy?
I would say we've had some phone calls. Yeah. I'll keep those phone calls to the vest, but we've had some phone calls. Yeah. Listen, there's a handful of players. Anytime you're at the top of the draft that you would deem generational talents, and we certainly feel that way this year as well. Well, it's a real skill set of talent. An impact player that can take the team to another level, whatever position it is. And then they also have to have the character makeup as well to go with it. Yeah.
How did that shape you in taking this job? How do you evaluate this process?
I was there for 16 years, so, we weren't just going to Super Bowls every year when I first got there. So, in 2012, we had a 2-14 season where we had to, rebuild it. There's some things throughout that process that I'll take. Just in terms of building the core positions that you need on the roster, offensive line, defensive line, and then also just getting, trying to build the culture right, too, to try to get the right type of people in there as well. People who are smart, tough, dependable, selfless players, team players. So that's what we're looking for right now. I'm sorry? Yeah, Abdul's a very good player. I don't want to go into many evaluations of the players, but like I said, there's certainly some players at the top there that fit that description of generational talent.
We saw firsthand Does that kind of skew like the level of importance you weigh on the trenches, being able to impact?
Well, I think it's always important. I mean, you can have Superman back there, and if you don't have the protection up front to protect, to be able to run the football, to be able to create balance in the game, that's the most important part, is building through the trenches. So offensive line, defensive line is going to be a big priority for us.
When you are fielding those offenses, what are some of the things you are looking for?
Yeah, we really haven't really gone into too much of that. You know, I've fielded some calls at this point, but we really haven't gone too much into it right at this point. Yeah. So to answer your first question, the last few weeks we've been in meetings the whole time, draft meetings, free agency meetings, going over our roster as well, meeting with the coaches. So it's been a busy time. In terms of the strengths, I'd say obviously defensive line, specifically the edge players. It's a really deep draft. I would say running backs, it's a good draft. There's some good tight ends in that position group. So I think it's a good draft overall, but there's certainly some positions that more strength and a little bit more depth in the middle to later rounds as well.
This team spent a lot of capital on offensive line. Does that factor in at all to what you do going forward because it hasn't spent a lot of capital at other positions?
No, not necessarily. I think we're starting this off on a clean slate right now. And offensive line, like I said, is going to be a top priority, whether that's through free agency, the draft, or anything, waiver claims, trades. We're going to look onto every avenue really to add to that group. And I think the most important part too is adding the right type of players to that group too. So that's a tight knit group, that offensive line. So getting tough guys in there, smart, dependable, good teammates. The characteristics for that group are very important.
You talked about wanting to add draft capital over the next 2 to 3 years to build this team. But in the interim, there may be a veteran quarterback or two who will become available, but the team might want draft capital for them. Does that make you more reluctant to pursue a veteran quarterback if the team wants draft capital?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the goal we stated to like I said, draft picks are our biggest form of currency. So, we're always going to try to gather as many picks in the top 100 as we can. But we have to be disciplined through the process here, as we're going through and looking at free agents and, possible trades. We certainly want to hold on to our draft picks as much as we can. I'm sorry? Yeah, obviously get off, the ability to dip around the edge, and just having a relentless passion to get to the quarterback is a big part of it. So those qualities are, the things that we're really looking for. Sure, I mean, you can think that way. But, at the end of the day, we have to make the best decision at this point for the Titans. And if we deem like taking a quarterback is the most important thing right now, then we'll do that. But we have to go through this process here. So this is like one touch point in the process. We've gone through the whole evaluation part. Now we're finally getting to sit down and meet with these guys and talk with them. We'll have pro days. They'll have 30-day visits. So we have to go through the whole process really to make that decision.
You know, by kind of a height, weight, speed characteristic by position, and when do you stray?
We do. We always have. You don't want to make exceptions at certain positions. So we'll have a profile for each position. Now, you never want to just throw away a good football player if he doesn't fit those measurables. But we certainly have profiles for every position in terms of, when we're making acquisition periods, whether it's free agency or the draft. Well, that's part of the strategy that you have to put together. Just like we're going to have a free agent strategy, there's going to be a draft strategy too. So we'll get together as a group and think through all that. But you certainly don't want to pass up on one of those players if you think they're there. And an opportunity to trade back, depends how far you can go back to get that player. So to your point, there's a strategy to it.
How would you define, one of the things that came up was being selective with free agency. How would you define it? You look at this organization last year, they spent a lot of money, didn't necessarily work out. What's your approach to being selective?
Well, I think in the press conference, our philosophy is we want to draft and develop. That's going to be our number one thing, number one priority. But to be selective is just to have discipline in the process. We're going to have targeted players that we want. And if sometimes, that player doesn't come to us, we're not just going to jump to the next player. We're going to have players that we're going to target, and you have to have discipline throughout that process as well.
In targeting those players, though, there could be some big ticket guys. I mean, obviously you have more holes than you can fill, no matter what you might end up with the draft.
Sure, Paul. I think that's part of the strategy too. We're trying to fill, probably as many holes as we can before the draft, and you're trying to see. At this point, you have a free agency board, you have a draft board. You're trying to see the depth in free agency and the depth in the draft, and where you might be able to acquire those players. But you certainly want to try to fill as many holes as you can in free agency, and we have some work to do on the roster.
What you do at quarterback in free agency, might that tip what you're doing with the first pick?
I don't think that will depend. I don't think those will go hand in hand. We could sign a quarterback in free agency and also draft a quarterback as well. Depends on the situation. The places I've been, we've always had, older quarterbacks kind of mentor the younger quarterback. It's almost like another coach in the room for them, just to kind of show them how to be a pro, teach them all the little things about protection and just how to study opponents. That would probably be a priority for us if we did end up drafting a quarterback. Yeah. He's a special player, yeah, for sure. We were watching him, and I don't know if there's anybody that's actually done what he's done in the modern day football, playing both offense and defense during the course of a season. He's a special player.
When you look at this roster, like you see, when you look at this roster, you see and talk about all the holes. Where do you see strengths on this roster right now?
I think we have some good interior guys right now with Sweat and Simmons. There's some pieces on the roster. Calvin's still a good receiver. But we have to get better throughout the offensive line. And that's going to be a priority for us. And that's part of the process here, too, is we're evaluating this roster, is trying to figure out, where are the weak points right now? Where do we really have to improve? But there are some pieces on the roster that we can build on, and certainly that interior defensive line is one of them.
How long before you can compete for a division?
Our hope is to compete every year for a division, Paul. But it's a process. So hopefully we're in contention this year. You always want to manage expectations, though. So as we go through this process, we acquire players. I think we'll have a better idea as we head into the season. I think he could. Yeah, I think he could. You've seen it. You've seen tape of it, and playing corner and receiver. So I think he can do both at a high level. Yeah, you take every drill into account. It's really just a validation of what you see on tape. Does the guy run as fast as you think he ran during when he was playing during the fall? And then it's almost like a red flag system too. So if there's some certain drills that they don't do well, that causes you to kind of go back and do a little more work in the tape to make sure you've seen it right as well. Yeah, so that was part of the process over the last few weeks, is really because we're trying to get everything done at once here, free agency, draft, and we met with the coaches during lunch during these times just to get a feel of the players on the roster, specifically how they are in meeting rooms and everything else. So that's a big part of it. We met with Brian and his staff over the past month here. I think we're in good shape right now. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I've been there before. I mean, it's arguably the most important position in sports, the quarterback position. So you have to get that right. We have to solidify that position. And we have Will on the roster right now, and he's going to compete with whoever we bring in. We have one quarterback on the roster, so we're bringing people in, and Will compete with them as well. I mean, if he's a generational pass rusher, I just like him to rush the passer. At that point, just play to his strengths. But now, if there's a guy that can drop in coverage, that's great. But if their strength is rushing the passer, that's what we want to see him do.
Hey, Mike, Chad, couple more. No daylight February for the scouting process.
Yeah.
Just wanted to get your take on what those past few weeks have been like during the no daylight time, and how you feel about how far you've gotten as a group together.
Yeah, I mean, it's an important time for us. You get in, early in the morning before the sun's up, and you're out of the building when the sun's down. So that's what he's referring to, and it's going into darkness is what we call it. But it's an important time for just to build camaraderie with the staff, creating bonds with the staff as well. And so we did that for the past months, which I think was great.
What's the status of your draft board at this point in the process? Have you started putting something together?
Yeah, so we set the board the first time, and we call it Phase 1. And I try to tell the scouts, listen, this isn't the final process. We have a lot of information to gather, medical information, character information, measurables, testing, but we do have an initial board set right now.
How much does that board change?
We try not to make drastic changes, Paul, on it, but some of the medical information obviously will affect that. Some of the testing does move guys up and down the board a little bit. But we try not to make drastic measures. We want to be a tape-driven team and really not just depend on these other variables that come in.
So what kind of like drop or rise would you see a guy make off of something, barring a huge
Small moves, yeah.